Good morning, LCC kids. Happy Sunday and Merry Christmas. Can you believe it? This Thursday is Christmas Eve, and then Friday, Christmas morning, is coming soon. We're going to jump into our Bible story in just a moment, but first we're going to play a game called Did Mary Know? Maybe you've been listening to some Christmas carols on the radio right now, and there's one song called Mary, Did You Know? It's talking about, hey, did you know that your baby boy was the Savior of the world, that you were looking at the face of God when you looked into his little face? Well, let's ask some questions about what would Mary have known? Not so much about Jesus, but just about the world around her. What stuff existed? What was invented yet? What aspects of culture and life would Mary, living in the first century in Israel, what would she have known? So let's see if you can guess. Yes or no, would Mary have known it? Let's look at fact number one. Swings. Would Mary have known about a swing set? Would that have been something maybe she did as a little girl? Say yes or no at home. And let's check it out. Maybe the ancient Greeks were playing on swings in the 5th century BC. All right, next one. Gloves. Did Mary ever wear a pair of gloves on her hands when it was nippy and cold outside? What do you think? Go ahead and show them. Probably. Homer, who wrote the Odyssey in the 8th century BC, BC's before Christ, mentions his characters wearing gloves. Maybe Mary knew about gloves. What else did Mary know? Stained glass. We see a lot of stained glass pictures of Mary and baby Jesus. Did she know about those? What do you think? Nope. The earliest example of stained glass was found in England in 675 AD, 675 years after Jesus was born. All right, keep moving. Ice skates. Any of y'all ever been ice skating before? You probably had to go somewhere to do it indoors or go to another town. Did Mary know about ice skates? Let's see. Unlikely, but she could. There were ice skates made of animal bone found in Scandinavia that go back to 3,000 years before Jesus, but it doesn't snow a ton in Nazareth, where she was from. All right, I think we got a couple more. Socks. Anybody getting a new pair of socks for Christmas this year? Did Mary know about socks? Probably. The ancient Greeks were wearing socks made of matted animal hair in 8th century BC. So her feet were cozy. I think, do we have one more of these? Pineapples. Did Mary know about pineapples? When were pineapples invented? Well, of course, they were never invented, but would she have eaten a pineapple? God created them. But no, pineapples were not known outside of South America until after 1500 AD. Now, people living in South America knew about them, but outside of that, they never tasted a pineapple until then. Well, we'll throw another Christmas game your way in just a moment, but we're returning to the story of David today. We're going to talk about probably the most famous thing that David is known for, which is his fight with Goliath. David and Goliath. We saw last week that the prophet Samuel showed up to this guy named Jesse's house, and one by one he went down his sons to find the next king until he said, is there anybody else who's not here? And the youngest one of all, David, was off with the sheep, smelling like animals, not even invited to the party, and yet he was anointed the next king of Israel. But it happened away from the public eye, quietly in a little town of Bethlehem. And meanwhile, Saul, big tall Saul, is still king on the throne of Israel. Well, one day, David is sent to be the errand boy and bring his older brothers their lunch and check on them while they're off with Saul. And they're out at facing off in battle with the Philistines, and they're at this place called the Shephelah, which if you think about like this valley, so you've got this one little hillside on one side, and then there's a lower dipping point, and then a hillside on the other side, and the armies of Israel were up on one hill, and the armies of the Philistines were on another, so you can kind of picture it, and that's when they would kind of, make a deal with each other and shout insults at each other's way, and the Philistines say, hey, we've got a good idea. In order to avoid everybody having a fight today, we'll send one champion forward, and you send one champion forward, and whoever wins that wins the battle. You can be our slaves if we win. We'll be your slaves if you win. And Israel says, fine, but then marching forward is a giant named Goliath of Gath. Anywhere between over 7 feet to 9 feet tall, depending on how we understand how the numbers work there. But this man is huge in size, and he's got people just there carrying his armor. He's got a shield bearer out in front of him. He is decked out and ready for battle, and all of Israel, they are shaking in their boots because nobody wants to go fight Goliath of Gath. But then David shows up, and David hears the insults that Goliath is making, not just against Israel, but against Israel's God. And what David sees in this moment is not just a giant, and we need to see as God sees. It's our first point for today. David sees as God sees here, because he sees with the eyes of faith. He sees that what Goliath is doing is he's ultimately insulting God. But he's also insulting the armies of the living God. We are God's people. God has promised to be with us. What are we afraid of? And so David, he's a teenager. He's young. He's not fully grown yet. He's not old enough to be a member of the army. He says this: is anybody going to go take this guy out? Take care of this man who is throwing insults at God himself? But notice this. Saul, remember him? He's a head taller than the rest of the people, so he's big and impressive. He doesn't go out to fight. Abner, who's the commander of his army, he's tall and impressive. He doesn't go out to fight. But David says, you know what? I'm going to take care of this guy and put him in his place, because God is with us. What did David see? Well, David saw that Goliath was both more and less than people thought he was. He says, you know what? He's just like a beast of the field. And God has been with me when I've taken out beasts before. I've had to fight bears. I've had to fight lions before. And he also saw that Goliath, he was kind of like ultimately the true enemy that we face off with, which is Satan. He's like a roaring lion. He's described as being this beast of the field. He's like that serpent back in the Garden of Eden. In fact, all of Goliath's armor, it's kind of like scales. He's like a scaly dragon in this moment here. But David knows God is on our side, and God is with us. David lives the thing that Samuel taught last Sunday, that God doesn't look on the outside appearance. God looks at the heart. David's not caught up in how Goliath appears on the outside. He says this, he says, take heart, I will face him. And he goes forward, and even though Goliath has a shield bearer, David has no shield. He just has the shield of faith in God, and one little stone thrown across decks Goliath right between the eyes and takes him out, because David saw as God saw. We'll consider in just a moment what else we need to learn from this story, but let's jump into another Christmas game. This one's called Siri-oki. You're going to hear Siri, the voice of Siri, read out some words to some Christmas carols, and maybe some of these will be familiar to you. See if you can guess the name of the Christmas carol that Siri reads. Let's look at our first one together.
There must have been some magic in that old silk hat they found, for when they placed it on his head, he began to dance around.
All right, what do we got here? Any guesses? It's kind of hard to follow what she's saying, and some of these words might not be ones you remember, but some of you might have guessed that is Frosty the Snowman. Let's keep moving.
A thrill of hope the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new glorious morn.
This is one of my favorite Christmas carols. I hope you know these words. If you're familiar with it, you probably heard it. But here it is. Oh, holy night. What do you have next for us, Siri?
I don't want a lot for Christmas. There is just one thing I need. I don't care about the presents underneath the Christmas tree.
This is one that is played every Christmas by Miss Mariah Carey, and she makes millions of dollars every year just from people playing this song. That is All I Want for Christmas Is You. All right, couple more.
'Tis the season to be jolly. Fa la 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 la, la la la, la.
Thank you, Siri. Do you know the title of that one? Everybody knows the fa la la part. What's that called? And that is Deck the Halls. All right, let's jump back into David's story here. Because, we asked the question, what did Mary know? Well, we asked, what did David know in this moment? David knew that God would be with him. That's what he saw. What else do we need to see in this story? We need to see who the real Savior is. Here's what a lot of people like to do with the story of David and Goliath. Talk about how if you go out, no matter what you face, no matter what you're scared of, you can be really brave, you can be strong, and you can take care of it. Is that what we're supposed to take away from this story? Well, if you read it in that way, you kind of imagine yourself as David. I think on some level we should think about how God can be with us in the same way he was with David. But you know where we are in this story? We're not first David going off to fight the battle. We are the armies of Israel on the sidelines, scared to death and needing somebody else to go rescue us. That's who the hero of the story is. Ultimately, the son of David who was born in the little town of Bethlehem, Jesus came, and Jesus came to deal with the greatest giant we would ever face, which was the giant of our sin. And just like David dealt with that beast out in the field named Goliath, Jesus came, and the beast, the scaly serpent, just like the one that was there in the Garden of Eden, he came, and as David came and crushed the head of the giant, Jesus came and he crushed the head of the serpent. And he forever beat our sin, and he is our Savior. He has fought the battle for us, and now he leads all of us in victory. And some of the best Christmas carols, they tell that story with some amazing words. And I hope you're paying attention to that this week, thinking about how because Jesus has come, because God has become one of us, and he entered into our humanity, he took on our skin, he knows what it's like to be one of us, ultimately to fix our greatest giant of a problem, which was our sin, so that we could have his peace and his presence forever. And that's what the host of the angels sing about when Jesus is born. This army host, normally they would be gathering for battle, but they sing peace on earth, goodwill toward men, because Jesus has come to bring peace. And you have a Merry Christmas this week.